Sharath Srinivasan is an associate professor in international politics at the University of Cambridge. He's also author of When Peace Kills Politics, International Intervention and Unending Wars in the Sudans. He joins us now from Boston in the UK, not Boston, Massachusetts. Professor, thanks so much for your time. Could it actually be a good thing that Burhan would like to dissolve and has issued this decree to dissolve the RSF paramilitary? Because I'm just thinking, if the RSF paramilitary says we're ready to integrate with you, the army, and so Burhan says, okay, well then you don't exist anymore, so all your fighters, officially, they become part of the army. Could it be seen as that?
Well, it could be seen as that. I think what we have to understand is that this conflict is playing out on three levels, obviously militarily, but also in terms of Sudanese society and the legitimacy of these two actors, and on the international stage as well. And by dissolving the RSF, Burhan is seeking to maximize, I think, his leverage at a time when militarily the RSF is not particularly been successful in its priorities and aims. So by doing this, the upper hand is achieved. And in a sense, if this is to go to any negotiating table, the army is saying under Burhan, the RSF is not an equal. And so don't treat them as equal when it comes to a negotiation. So I think that's the kind of core dynamic going on here, is a desire to delegitimate the RSF at a critical moment. We shouldn't remember that the conflict has had a huge and horrendous effect on Sudanese civilians, over 5 million displaced, untold suffering and killing and targeted killings. Mostly with the RSF considered heavily responsible, but also the Sudan army. And at this juncture, something was having to give. And I think this is a set of moves on all fronts, domestic, with the dissolution of the RSF, but also international with these visits in the region, to push the army into a commanding position, whether that's militarily or in any negotiation.
Do you see a similar situation developing in Sudan as has been happening in Libya, where you have so many different militias who are very reluctant to integrate into any official bodies because they realize that they're implicated and alleged to have taken part in so many abuses that if they become legitimate members of any fighting force, they could then be open to some sort of prosecution? And here in Sudan, I'm thinking about the most hardened elements of the Janjaweed militias.
Well, that's always a concern, but we shouldn't forget that, of course, President al-Bashir, members of the armed forces, were indicted by the International Criminal Court going back many, many years now. That hasn't stopped them from, retaining office, and it hasn't stopped the army from still seeing itself as the legitimate armed forces of the country. So I don't think that applies solely to the RSF. It probably applies to all of the security and military actors, including the army. But it is true that most recently, and we've seen this with the United States and its recent announcement of sanctions, that the targeting of the RSF is going on. So what is happening on the international stage, I think, here is that a set of actors are, in a sense, not willing to treat the RSF on equal terms with the army, and given the atrocities that the RSF has inflicted, seeking to hold them to account, or at least delegitimate them. So in that sense, I think, yes, we do see that the RSF is probably not is wary of any sort of space for negotiation and mediation. But I think it's also important to understand that the RSF is a ragtag brigade of soldiers of fortune and young youth and militias, all being paid out of the political economy of the RSF, which is largely around gold production. So integrating those sorts of forces into the regular army is also a confusing idea, and not one I think that anyone takes too seriously at this point.
Sharath, what can Qatar deliver for Burhan? Can Qatar actually deliver some kind of peace, do you think?
I don't think Qatar is, in this moment, positioned very well to play a strong mediation role, although it has played a mediation role vis-a-vis Darfur in the past. I think this is about Qatar, but it's also about proposed a regional tour, visits to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, turning up to the UN General Assembly. This is, as I said, about the conflict on the international stage, and using this moment of opportunity where the RSF is looking delegitimated, it's being held to account. US sanctions are targeting it. There's a great shock and horror at some of the violence that's perpetrated, and using this moment to strengthen the international, in a a sense, alliance around the SAF as the primary actor here, whether that is to choke the RSF militarily or whether that is to ensure that at the negotiating table it is Burhan that's calling the shots. I think Qatar plays a role here, not a central role, but is part of a mix. The AU, the regional IGAD, a collection of states are in the primary sort of seat for the mediation itself. Egypt is a crucial player as well. But I think Burhan is looking to get Qatar, certainly Saudi Arabia, clearly the United States has tilted towards being against the RSF. Egypt has always been on side, leaving only the United Arab Emirates as probably the most challenging international actor for Burhan to convince to disengage from the RSF.
Sharath Srinivasan, thank you so much. And by the way, we do have to point out that you are in Boston, Massachusetts, but it becomes confusing because Harvard is obviously in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You're from the University of Cambridge, but not in Boston, Lincolnshire in the UK. A quick geography lesson there. Thank you so much indeed, Professor. Really appreciate it.